worth knowing. I'm April, a brand creator around healing and wellness.
And I'm Meg, coming from the world of nonprofit and social work education.
Meg and I met through a mutual friend, and both of us were on a journey of healing personally and professionally.
And today we're going to be discussing the very broad concept of intuition, and really diving into what is intuition, what does it mean for both of us, and we invite you to take this journey with us around growth, around self-discovery. And April found a definition of intuition that spoke to both of us. So, go.
Yeah. You know what I just realized?
What?
We're on an awesome journey that we get to invite
I know.
this whole world around us, and that we get to share our own experiences and help guide some personal growth. And I'm really excited about it. So let's dive in. I looked up for fun, what is your intuition on Wikipedia?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought I would read this definition. And it says intuition is the ability to acquire knowledge without recourse to conscious reasoning. Different fields use the word intuition in very different ways, including but not limited to direct access to unconscious knowledge, unconscious cognition, inner sensing, inner insight to unconscious pattern recognition, and the ability to understand something instinctively without any need for conscious reasoning. So after reading that, Meg, how do you know what your intuition is?
Mm-hmm.
And also scientifically, what's the research behind what intuition is and what it's actually noticing intuition and how that plays a role of the gut feeling?
Mm-hmm. For sure. I think, one of the things, as you texted me a few days ago, is just how much science there is behind that mind-body connection, and particularly around the gut. And
which is funny because
that's how I describe it.
We don't technically want to go say we need science validation, but it's cool that we can say, look, science is finding that our gut is playing that role on purpose, and now it's kind of validating, like, intuition is not woo-woo.
Exactly. Very validating. And not that I really needed that, but like you said, it helps. And so for me, that's how I've always described it. It's a gut feeling. It's not in my head. Mm-hmm. It's definitely in my body, in my heart. And so when I know when my intuition is coming up, it's not because I have this thought that pops into my mind. It's like, I've got this feeling and it's living somewhere in my body. Sometimes I'm not quite sure where. Sometimes it's not always the gut, but it usually ends up there, and then can certainly impact other things. For me, I haven't had many physical responses in terms of like irritable bowel syndrome, things like that, because we're going to talk about that kind of stuff here. So get ready. For me, it shows up as definitely anxiety, but even the way anxiety shows up in my body is very much a physical response.
Yeah.
Like, I get jittery, I get shaky, I get nervous in my mind, yes, but also just in my whole body. And like, those are the times that maybe I shouldn't be chopping vegetables because it's just not going to end so well.
Your intuition's screaming.
My intuition's saying, you know what, girl, you gotta slow down for a second, because chopping that onion not gonna work right now.
I almost chopped off the tip of my index finger 2 weeks ago, processing trauma at the same time as I was chopping carrots or tomato, and I sliced off just the tip of my fingernail and just was like, this is not the time to be using sharp knives. And I am a very excellent, safe cook. I'm okay with saying that too. First time ever that I have almost chopped off a finger, but it's going to play into this podcast pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe I'll read the little blurb also from our scientific source.
Yeah.
That I shared with you, and I was intrigued, and I come from a world where I really love to dive into neuroscience and the spiritual world, and how they're starting to come together and meet. So talking about intuition for me and having a scientific piece of it feels really fun, because I think obviously most science world 20 years ago would be like, this is total woo-woo nonsense.
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Well, I
What are we
also
talking
think
about?
it invites listeners and others, anyone else that you might want to tell to go listen to us, that it really makes it accessible.
Mm-hmm.
When you have both of those fields supporting something similar like intuition.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that just really helps make it accessible, make it palatable, because we want to be able to reach as many people as we're able to, not to be shutting people out.
Yeah, and I guess we also want to recognize that many people have been living in a space of feeling or knowing something deeper is within,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been hard to access, or you've been afraid, whether you come from a religious world or you come from a place that is just not even recognized, and that this is why we're bringing it to the table, that we're opening that door right now.
Mm-hmm.
And both of us are going to share stories in a minute about how we both were able to sort of turn off or ignore what was intuition,
Yeah.
and what that did in our bodies. But first I'm going to read this definition, and this is from a article or a paper in the NIH, and just the little blurb is, it's actually a signaling from the gut microbiota to brain, and from brain to gut microbiota by means of neural, endocrine, immune, and humoral links. So they summarize available evidence supporting the existence of these interactions.
And think about how many systems of the body are listed there. Like, we've got the endocrine system, we've got the hormonal system. And so that, to me, again, just reinforces, it's like, this is a real thing. It shows up in our bodies in a very medical and potentially traceable way. And I think it's important. It's important to know.
Yeah, and this speaks to saying, in clinical practice, evidence of the microbiota, GBA interactions, comes from the association of dysbiosis with the central nervous disorders, i.e., anxiety, depressive behaviors, or other things that we notice in our body,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be eating disorders or things that show up when we are actively ignoring what would be an intuition or a physical response to
Mm-hmm.
things going on, not just a reasoning and not just a thought, and ignoring that in our body.
Yeah.
So that circles me back to our own experience of, how do you know it's your intuition? And you spoke to, it's a feeling in your body.
Yeah.
And for me, I can say as a child, I could enter a room and feel the energy that left. I could feel what was going on around me, and we both are self-proclaimed empaths.
I was just gonna jump in and say we forgot to mention, but definitely, I'm sure some of our listeners can relate. But yeah, it was only a year or two ago that I read enough to realize, maybe I am an empath, and maybe that can explain some things related to my intuition.
Right. And as a child, I would feel these things. As an empath, as a highly sensitive person, and I was told by my parents, and obviously this isn't a blame thing, this is what they knew to say to a sensitive child is, toughen up, stop being so emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And what that told me was, as a child, what I felt around me wasn't correct, that I needed to feel something different, that felt appropriate to what other people wanted me to feel. And I think knowing that you are born with an intuition as a child, you have a connection to your intuition until you are trained out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And as an adult, many of us cope to deal with not being in touch with the intuitive side, which is a gut response. It is, when you're sitting in that stillness, you can actually go deeply and know truth. You can know it from a loving space within, and you can respond more appropriately versus a high anxiety state where you're spinning. Many of us don't realize our thoughts are just a spinning record. And being able to settle enough to make decisions that feel rightly ordered. So when you're following your intuition or listening, it could be for something good or bad. But the next step, once you know you've acknowledged it, is that the next thing you're doing feels rightly ordered and healthy.
And I think that also, along with you saying like appropriately responding to something, and I want to be really clear because I know that this is how you mean it. It's like appropriate for you. So intuition is so personal. So this doesn't, like, April's not talking about, you know, appropriate for somebody else or appropriate for society, whatever that means. But actually appropriate for ourselves, and that it's so personal, and knowing what's appropriate for ourselves is part of knowing our intuition and listening to it and actually reacting from that space.
Right. So saying that you're, for example, something comes up and you're feeling anxious about it, or you're in any kind of relationship, a friendship, a romantic relationship, something with family members or parents, and you experience the pattern recognition of something that seems not quite right over and over and over again. Sometimes it's saying, I can't put my finger on it, but something's not right.
Yeah.
And then you realize it's that intuition pointing to that thing, but some of us will follow it and some of us will ignore it, and that's what I call the like bypass of the intuition, into a place where suddenly, as this NIH article describes, your body starts to signal things, and because it comes from the gut, and so it could be everything from IBS to anxiety, eating disorders. If some of us bypass or shut down, so you get depression,
right?
And I'm not a clinician, but I've experienced all of these things and seen other people pass through these things just through the act of bypassing something that they know they need to pay attention to in their life or address in whatever way that needs to happen. But it's being honest about that within themselves. And I think many of us can fall into a state of trying to bypass an intuitive thing that we're experiencing, is trying to tell us, pay attention, this good thing is happening, or this negative thing is happening, or I need you to listen so we go in the right direction.
I think for one of the, when you mention, you know, clinical work, I've done, you know, years and years of clinical work, but also just not even speaking from that experience as much as my own experience around when any of those things are happening, whether it's eating disorder behavior, whether it's like intense anxiety, depression, it's usually a symptom, right? And like you're talking about. And so noticing that when I have in my own life started listening to my intuition, those things sort of start to go away. It's not a magic fix.
No.
It's not like, you know, all of a sudden I recognize my intuition, I'm going to follow it, and then that anxiety is gone and it's great and the world is wonderful.
Yeah.
But it opens that door for that to be possible. And I've seen that, you know, both, like I said, in myself, but also in my clinical work as well. And people of all ages, people struggling with all variety of things. And I'm sure some of you all can relate as well, to either observing someone else, you know, in your lives who maybe got down to what was really going on underneath those symptoms, and then those symptoms started to disappear, and maybe even for your own lives.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when I've gone to a place that my body's not functioning, that's when I notice I am deeply ignoring we're gonna go and say shit that
We can.
that is important to pay attention to in order for me to function,
Yeah.
right, in a healthy way. And I will openly say alcohol can be an easy bypass. I just don't want to feel this right now. Even one drink for me is something that I'm like, if I have the thought in my mind, like, wouldn't it be nice to have a drink because it's been a hard day? That's a bypass. And it's okay. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it's like, well, okay, but then I got to sit down at some point and pay attention.
And that's so common in our world and in our culture. And I think in the world in general, to, especially for something like drinking that's legal, but also for other illegal things. And this is, again, there's no judgment around that. It's just noticing, like you're saying, it's noticing, I wonder, like, why is that coming up right now?
Right. So there's 2 more questions that I think are important to address. One is, why should you trust your intuition? Because one, if you have a hard time trusting yourself at all, trusting intuition is going to be a process of trial and error. It's going to be a process of finding that bit of self-love to say, I think I got this.
Yeah.
There has to be some confidence in that. And so those are 2 steps that could be really hard if you're in a really tough place. And I, again, compassionately, I've been there. I can say that I've cycled through places where I'm like, am I even worth doing any of this or having a voice to say anything? And then having that confidence to look deep within and say, well, I was put here on the planet for a reason. And it certainly wasn't to just self-destruct.
Hopefully not.
Which I think a lot of us sometimes feel.
Oh, absolutely.
Can I just self-destruct because whatever, say something goes wrong, or maybe you hurt someone's feelings, or maybe someone's feelings got hurt and you didn't even mean to, or things just keep going wrong in your life, and at some point you're just like, can I just like
check out?
Just go, because this isn't fun.
Yeah.
But then taking some steps backward to look at the bigger picture and sit within my body and sit and stare at a tree or whatever it is that brings me back to a grounded space and listen deeply, and the intuition starts to let you know. And I could say I shut off my intuition for religious reasons, like I want the Holy Spirit to tell me what to do. And that was even more difficult because I was ignoring it completely and waiting for someone else to come fix it or to tell me how I should be behaving or living my life. Right? And I put myself through a lot of trauma for that sake. And that's also something that I want to bring up, is that if you're waiting for someone else to tell you what to do, or you're seeking an outside source from your inner spirit, your inner intuition, then you're also bypassing.
Right. Because it's another way to check out. Because then it's another way to like just not pay attention, which sometimes we need those times in our lives. Sometimes we're so overwhelmed that
it's okay to check in with
it's okay to just like, lean on others. But at the same time, I think it's important to know that you're worth coming back to that intuition, maybe even after you've checked out, or maybe even after you've leaned on someone else.
Yeah.
For me, when I was, you were talking about when you were younger and being told like, oh, you just need to toughen up. And for me, the way it showed up when I was younger, my intuition was that, and my tendencies as an empath that I had no idea about when I was younger.
Closeted by accident.
Exactly, pretty much. But I would notice that.
Is this our coming out of the closet as empaths?
I think probably, right? I think for me it was mainly around, like, I was in my own world as a kid. And I liked being there, and sometimes I would have different people in my life, not so much my parents, but people in my life who would try to like bring me out of there, like, hey, like, can you come and be social? Hey, can you come and like, you know, you just need to stay for this, or you need to go play with someone else. I would hover a lot around the adults at dinner parties because I was like, I don't really want to go play with the other kids.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of bored with them. But yes, I was absorbing, and I was also super smart, so I wanted to like be with the adult conversation. So I think for me, I did what I now realize in retrospect is that it was my way of protecting myself, because if I put myself in too many social situations or too many situations where I was absorbing too much stuff, I would be too overwhelmed. And so staying in my own world was really a self-preservation thing. I loved it too, and still do. But it was also around self-preservation. And then for me, adolescence was really what kicked that even more to the curb.
Like close the door.
Really
to
shut
the closet
the door.
of you and
It
intuition.
was like, no, we're not even paying attention to this, because like you got to fit in somewhat. You want to be dateable. You want to be able to like hang with your friends. You want to be able to have friends because that's what you're supposed to do. And like I have good friends. That's not a bad thing. It's just that all of those messages from the outside world were that's what I was absorbing, and allowing myself to absorb that.
What I hear.
And I was hormonal because I was
a teenager.
Yeah.
God.
Couldn't pay
Let's
me
get back to that in a second.
to go
But
back.
I think what I hear and what I want to point out to our audience is that as a child, you look to your parents and your elders for the advice of how to live.
Yes.
And you focus.
And you absorb it more than you even realize.
You absorb it because you want to model what you see.
Right.
So that's the first step of, and rarely in our culture do our elders and our role models say, you have an intuitive side and I think you need to listen to that. I'm thankful I can share that with my own child and talk to her about, there is something telling you within yourself, and you can call it your higher self, you can call it intuition, you can call it spirit, universe, whatever you want, but there is that voice that is telling you, and it is your own wisdom, your innate inner wisdom, to listen to that. And I'm thankful I can share that with her now and at this point in her life. But as a child, our role models most of the time don't share that information because they've bypassed it.
Right.
And that's okay. There's compassion around that. So you start there, right? And then you go into your teens with cultural influences and that desire, and your adolescence of, I've got to fit in. I can't listen to this because if I do, I'm
going to be way weird.
I'm weird. And then you get to 30, which I think we both have. We get to 30 and you're like, dang, wait a minute, that
this
me?
One's been there the whole time.
That me I've been ignoring for the last 15 years or more is actually pretty freaking cool.
Yeah.
And she knows what's up.
Yeah. I think back to being a little kid, as you were talking, I was thinking about, I wonder, did my parents in any way, maybe without using the word intuition, encourage that? And for me, they did, and it was under the umbrella of independence. I was encouraged to be very independent and encouraged to do what I want. And so as a younger kid,
it's not too weird.
Right. Well, actually I did, I showed up to school with baggy sweatpants and a skirt over it. Nice. So there was a little bit of that. But I think for me, being a little kid and my experiences around wanting to be in my world and being overwhelmed, I wasn't as much pulled out by my parents, which is probably why I got to stay in that space for a while. I was pulled out by other people who couldn't help themselves, I guess, by telling me what I maybe should be doing. But because my parents were supportive in that way, I was able to sort of be myself. But then I got launched into adolescence, and that's when like we were saying, that's when I really had to shut the door, because it was like, we're not gonna hang with you if you're gonna be like that weird independent girl your parents encouraged you to be earlier.
Yeah.
Like, sorry.
Yeah.
And there were little pieces. There were pieces I could bring forward. Like the first time that I went to a dance in 8th grade, and my date's parents came to pick me up with him at our front door, and I can picture us standing in our front hall, and there had already been this whole issue around the fact that I wanted to pay for myself to go to the dance. And my parents just literally physically, because it was a very small space, were standing behind me, and neither one said anything. And his mom was very traditional and was like, can you just she's like asking me, this has already been decided in my mind.
Right.
But she's asking me, like, can you just let him pay? And I was just like, no, I'll pay for myself. And I will never forget that my parents didn't say anything, and it was awesome, because I was like, thank you.
They
guys.
weren't trying to make the situation better.
Right. But
for
I could,
her or you, they were just kind of like, let Meg stand on her own.
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so those are the pieces that I was able to bring forward, is some of that independence, but not so much because of teenagehood and how that all goes, not that super emotional side of me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she wasn't really invited.
There was the independent spirit, and I definitely engaged with that under the guise that I was being strong.
Right.
And so and especially let's address in the female world, we're taught we need to be strong as concrete, to not be too emotional. We'll get into a podcast around hormones and periods, but be strong as steel and show up and be independent, because you should take care of yourself. You don't need anybody.
But you should also be accommodating and caring
and gentle and soft.
And gentle and soft all at the same time.
So where does intuition fall into that when you're trying to be all of these things and check all these boxes? And I found, and I'll often get imbalanced from it too. It's always a checking in within. But I know when I'm following my intuition, when I feel grounded, when I feel in my body, and I'm sure all of us can think of many times, and if not most of the time, when we're living out of body. We're living in projections of the next thing that's supposed to happen. We're living in a projection of something that happened yesterday or years ago, and we're not in our body physically. And when you finally get there, for me, I have to lay on the ground or on a yoga mat or sit, or even in bed, breathe deeply, and I can actually feel my blood flow a little more and calm. Then that's when you can really listen. And intuition, your deeper knowing and this unconsciousness can kind of rise up, and you can pay attention and listen to it more deeply. Some people meditate or practice mindfulness for that to happen. And I notice it can happen then too. But some people just get way distracted and they're thinking butterfly thoughts everywhere too.
Which is totally fine also, if you would like to think butterfly thoughts. I think what you mentioned about all of those expectations, like where does intuition fit into all of those expectations, especially around being a woman and, in the time, soft, gentle,
soft steel,
independent, dependent and independent all at the same time.
Yeah.
And for me, what I recognize is that the more I pay attention to my intuition, the more I can let those things go. And so it doesn't really matter, like those extremes don't really matter at that point. And I think that's where it's not, and I just said they don't matter. I will say I still think about it. So they still matter some,
They're
but I'm able to let them go.
These, I don't know,
They're
guardrails, I think, right?
bit.
You're driving.
Yeah.
We'll go with guardrails, because you know that there's this thing and this thing, but you're gonna do your thing.
Yeah.
And you know that they exist.
They're there in the periphery.
You really don't want to bump up onto one side and say like, well, I'm gonna be completely this, or bump to the other side. But, and there isn't, and I don't like this saying that it's somehow balanced, but you recognize that most of that, it doesn't matter. And as you process through that and you get to the heart of something that you're dealing with in your life, whether it's a trauma, whether it's something that you notice is building to something good or bad, you're recognizing within that the veil drops, and that story or narrative that you were trying to pander to isn't what your life experience needs to be. And that's where your intuition keeps kind of showing up to you, is like, maybe that narrative of you not being good enough, or maybe that narrative that you're expected to be the president of the United States doesn't matter, because your journey has already taken on its own character and its own beautiful thing, and you are the guidepost of your life. Life doesn't happen to you.
And it also has definitely allowed me to let go of like all of that kind of genderized language.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, I'm just, like you're saying, I'm creating my own narrative. This doesn't need to be, like, there are times where I want to feel feminine, but it's because I'm feeling that for myself, and not because I'm being told or listening to the world around me.
A low-cut V-neck t-shirt and tight jeans is from Gap. I'm going back to adolescence, but that's what you're supposed to wear because it's kind of cute, and you'll get the guys.
Right.
I mean, sweats and a skirt over it isn't a thing.
I mean, it was in preschool, but yeah, I probably would have liked to wear it in high school. Or like, I mean,
a mini skirt with sweatpants.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah, I think just all of those, because there's so many expectations, and and as we just illustrated, there's so many competing expectations that it's like, that to me just is another encouragement around leaving it all. Like, okay, got it. Like, they're all competing anyway, so what am I supposed to do with that?
We're here and born into an existence that has 100% freedom to design your life around beautiful, happy circumstances, and things will happen that block that.
Yeah. And beauty in the way that it is beautiful to you. Yeah. Like, all of that being so individual and so, and that's okay, and that there's nobody else's idea of whatever fill in the blank is.
Yeah. And recognizing that your intuition will allow you to unfold those things for yourself. And as Meg and I have discussed many times, and prior to recording this, that every time we lean into this, and every time we allow ourselves to let everything else fall away and follow our intuitive spirit or nature, whatever you want to call it, every time we do that, we feel deeply fulfilled by our lives, and we feel deeply fulfilled within ourselves. And that's what we want to share. And as we go deeper into the podcast, and we are sharing our blog posts with you and with our audience, there's going to be opportunities that we're going to share in the future with you. And we are really excited that you'll be able to join us and dive deeper, because this is just the surface level of this conversation around intuition. But we want to go ahead and start having the conversation and putting it out there into the wider world.
And we invite all of you, I mean, make comments, ask questions. We're open to it all.
Yeah. Well, I think that wraps up What is Your Intuition podcast this week. But we're really excited that you joined us on the Worth Knowing podcast. And we're going to have a blog up soon. And we just invite you to participate in this journey of healing with us. Because the more people on this journey, the more wonderful life is. And we're just excited that you're here with us. So thanks for joining.